الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين. Please recite a salawat. Okay, so inshallah, by the grace of Allah, we have the opportunity here to this evening, or morning for me, to talk about the Ahlul Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. Inshallah, I hope that this is something that will be of benefit for you, dear brothers and sisters, and inshallah, it is something that Allah accepts from us. As you can see from the title, the plan for the class was to discuss the social political role of the Imams, alayhimus salam. Normally, when we discuss the Imams in terms of what we hear from the mimbar, or even in terms of what our ulama, may Allah bless all of them, have worked on, it has been more pertaining to other aspects of imamah and the imams. So, for example, the Shia community throughout the history has always been very concerned with proving the veracity of their claim, of their madhab. So, proving the need for imamah. Why do we need to have an imam after the Holy Prophet's demise? Sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. After we have concluded that we need an imam, who is the imam? Proving that Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam and the other 11 Imams are the true Imams. That's another thing that's been given a lot of importance to. Then in our aqaid and beliefs, we go into a lot of detail about what are the qualities of an Imam. Is an Imam infallible? Does he have to be infallible? What is the extent of his knowledge? These are very detailed discussions that we go into. Or, of course, the whole subject of fiqh, which is the cream of the Hawza and one of the main areas that our ulama have gone into and worked very hard to derive what the rulings of the Sharia are, what it is that Allah Ta'ala wants us to do in our day-to-day life, gathering this from the teachings of the Imam and of the Holy Prophet. So, very detailed discussions of etiquette of how to carry out ibadat and different aspects of our life, that would be subjects that are normally talked about and studied and discussed with regards to the Imam. Even in terms of the life history of the Imam, we often talk about specific matters pertaining to what happened in their life. Where were they born? Where did they die? When were they born? How many children did they have? All that is all very good and very important. But one of the very unfortunate things that has happened is that not much work has been given to analyze the political and social effects that the Imams had at their time. As you can see in these two pictures that I've put here in the slides, one is of Allama Amini, rahmatullahi alayhi, one of the great scholars that we had in the last century, just to give an idea of somebody who really struggled and worked hard and left a very important legacy pertaining to Imamah. But again, what was the area that he was working in? He wrote a huge book that is very valuable, where he had become an expert in Sunni ahadith and history. And his main goal behind his book, which is called Al-Ghadir and comprises of more than 10 volumes, the main goal that he had, rahmatullahi alayhi, was to prove the veracity of Ghadir. That Ghadir was an event that happened that is undeniable. We have so many different chains of ahadith from the Sunni sources. So much poetry over the centuries has been written about Ghadir. And so, of course, he addressed many other things in those 10 volumes as well. But what I'm saying is that, again, the work that he did is an example of some very valuable work that we have that was done to prove the imamat of Amirul Mu'mineen. But how many people have gone in and analyzed and read and analyzed and presented this material to the common Shia community or to the Muslim world or to everybody with regards to the political stances of the Imam, the social stances? What were the stances that the Imam had with regards to the oppression that was happening at their time? How did they react to it? How did they plan to confront it? And so on and so forth. So unfortunately, when we think of our Imams, alayhimus salam, we don't often look at them in that light. Whereas if you think about it, let us analyze how we would look at other important social figures, political figures, people who led revolutions in their community, people who had an impact on history. If I wanted to hear about Nelson Mandela, for example, who is the second picture that I've put here in these slides, if I wanted to know more about Mandela, it wouldn't matter so much to me when he was born and where he grew up. What would be more important in learning who he is and what impact he had would be to analyze these kind of things. That what was the social role that he had? What was his role in getting rid of apartheid in South Africa? So yeah, that's what I wanted to start off with. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. My voice is clear. If you can just send a message. Okay, Alhamdulillah. So inshallah, in these two sessions that I have before you, that's this week and the following week, we will try to look at some of the episodes in history, some of the ahadith and riwayat, to derive what the Imams alayhimus salam, what their role was socially, politically. In these 2 weeks, we will look at the role that the Imams played and some of their interactions with the oppressive tyrant caliphs of their time. That's what we will look at today, inshallah. Next week, we will try to discuss a little bit about their interaction with their Shia and how we see very beautifully that towards the end of the time of the 11 Imams before the Ghaiba, the Imams alayhimussalam were running a very large and very organized network amongst the Shia, training them, funding them. Inshallah, we'll look at some of this tomorrow. If inshallah we have the tawfiq to also continue this class in the spring, the plan is this, that will be another 2 sessions in the spring sometime. Then inshallah we'll look at some other very, very beautiful and very interesting discussions with regards to how the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam interacted with the scholars of their time. People like Abu Huraira, who you must have heard of. These were a very important role. These scholars played a very important role in justifying and legitimizing the illegitimate governments of that time. So how the Imams very sternly reacted to them and in a very principled manner opposed these scholars. Similarly, poetry was such an important means of conveying media at that time, passing the message of the Ahlul Bayt, confronting the Khulafa. So how did the Imams act with poets who were playing such a role? And the third thing that's very interesting that we'll look at, inshallah, in the springtime is that throughout the time of the Imams, this 250-year period from the death of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the Ghaiba, in particular from after Karbala till the Ghaibat al-Sughra started, there were many people who started armed rebellions against the oppressive governments of their times. Many of them were in fact from the Banu Hashim. They were what we would say in Farsi Imam Zadeh. Many Imam Zadeh started revolutions. People like Zayd, the son of the fourth Imam. People like one of the descendants of the second Imam called Shaheed Fakh. People like somebody called Taba Taba'a. He's the father of all the Taba Taba'i Sadat today that we have. These were important revolutionary figures who, unfortunately, a lot of times the Shia community has a negative opinion towards them. We think of them as extremists. We think of them as people who didn't listen to the Imam. Whereas, inshallah, if we have the tawfiq, we will discuss some of these things in the springtime later on. Just to encourage you guys, inshallah, to also attend that class if it does actualize. So inshallah, in about 20 minutes or so, it will become the time of Fajr prayer here. So I will take a break, pray my Fajr prayers, and come back. Before we go into the actual stories of history, like I said today, we want to talk about the Imam with the Khulafa. I'm guessing that we will do that after we take a break. Before we go into that, we want to just set the grounds and officially mention a few fundamentals of how we want to look at these historical stories that we're going to come across. So as Shias who believe in the Imams, we're looking at the Imams when we look at history as each and every one of them being ma'asum. So part of what that should entail is that there is no difference in how they would react. If Imam Hassan alayhi salam signs a peace treaty with Muawiyah, but Imam Hussein alayhi salam starts an armed rebellion against Yazid, it's not because of their, God forbid, their own temperament or their own tendency. No, no, of course not. It is because there was a certain wajib responsibility upon Imam Hassan, that his responsibility in his time entailed that he had to sign a peace treaty, whereas Imam Hussein alayhi salam had a different responsibility. So part of believing in their isma should also show to us that they would each act appropriately for their time, and there's no real difference. At the end of the day, if we look at the life of one Imam or the other Imam, they should be all working towards the same goal. We have in ahadith, لأن كلنا واحد أولنا محمد وآخرنا محمد وأوسطنا محمد وكلنا محمد فلا تفرقوا بيننا. We have this idea very clearly in ahadith that all of us are the same. You shouldn't make a difference between us. However, despite this, as I'll also come to in the next slide, we see a very marked difference in how the Imams acted. In fact, even one Imam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, during the time of the Banu Umayyah, acted in a certain way. And when the Banu al-Abbas came into power, he was forced to act in a different way. So it's not about the Imams differing from one person to another, it's more about the reality of the world that they lived in and what they were forced to do. Another very important fundamental that we want to mention before we go into history is that we believe as Shias that the Imams alayhimussalam were entrusted with a certain responsibility from Allah. Okay, part of that responsibility we know is that they have to explain the religion of Allah to the Muslim community. That was part of the Prophet's responsibility, and that was part of what they continued after the Holy Prophet. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And that part we normally know about. We normally discuss that. We talk about how the fifth Imam and the sixth Imam, they were given that opportunity to openly, at least to a less, there was less political pressure upon them. So all of a sudden, they were able to teach so many students. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam had 4,000 students, it is said. If you look at if you look at the Muslim Ummah in that time, you very clearly see that the fifth Imam and the sixth Imam, they had a huge impact, not just on the Shia community. Today, the vast majority of our ahadith in the Shia books of hadith, in particular in subjects such as fiqh, it's all come, a large percentage of it has come from the fifth and sixth Imam, alayhim assalam. But not just that, the whole Muslim community was taken forward. Great Sunni scholars were trained by the Imams, studied, benefited from the Imams. Just to narrate one example, there's a companion of the eighth Imam who was a great scholar, a great muhaddith. His name was, um, I just have it here somewhere, one second. Yeah, his name was Washa'. He was, like I said, a companion of the eighth Imam, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. So he lived a little bit after the sixth Imam. This companion, Washa', he narrates that when I would be in the mosque in Kufa, I spent a lot of time in Kufa basically, and I saw so many scholars coming and going from the mosque of Kufa. And he said, I saw 900 scholars come and go. Every one of them was narrating from Ja'far ibn Muhammad. Every one of them would say, Haddathani Ja'far ibn Muhammad, alayhim assalam. So we see that the sixth Imam, in that opportunity he had, he was able to take the whole ummah forward by his knowledge. But was that the only responsibility that the Imams had? No, of course not. As Muslims, we believe that the Holy Prophet and Islam, they came to also establish the rule of Allah, to establish a society, to take the whole of society towards the servitude of Allah, to establish an environment where the tide takes people naturally towards Allah, where somebody, if a lady wants to be chaste and be modest, it's very easy for her. If a man wants to live a life of piety, it's very easy for him because the society is moving in that direction. And so that was the other responsibility that the Imams alayhimussalam had, was to practically rule the Muslim society. They were the hakim, the imam, as we will see in some of these stories that we will come to. Of course, that right was usurped from them. we know what happened after the demise of the Holy Prophet. But does that mean that then they just have to sit down and just leave that responsibility altogether? No, definitely not. That's not what they did, as we will see. The last thing that I have here, this is my last slide before we enter actual historical discussions, is I want to say that the unfortunate reality is that a lot of Muslims, including lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, including the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, they have a distorted image of the Imams. They don't look at the Imams as being these champions of justice who did whatever they could to struggle and to take their society back towards the servitude of Allah. Unfortunately, many of us, when we think of the lives of the Imam, we think of them almost in a contradictory way. That Imam Hassan did one thing, Imam Hussein was working towards another goal. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was busy carrying out ibadah and reciting dua and crying and fasting, whereas Imam Sadiq was busy teaching in Medina. Unfortunately, we have this very contradictory and very wrong, distorted image of the Imams. So here I want to just mention a couple of factors that have led to this distorted image that inshallah, if Allah wills, in these few classes we have before us, I want to try to rectify this image. One of the reasons why the image is like this is that naturally, like I said, the Imams alayhimus salam, they lived in different times, and the responsibility because of the world that they lived in was a different responsibility. So when we look, yeah, it's true. We do see that Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, after trying in the beginning to wake up the Muslim Ummah, after taking Zahra al-Mardiya alayhi salam and going to the houses of the Muslims and knocking on their door and reminding them that, don't you remember what the Holy Prophet had said about me? Don't you remember that I was supposed to be the leader of this Ummah? After a while, he stopped that course of action. And in fact, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam helped the Khulafa. He helped the first and the second Khalifa, undoubtedly, because he had to. He saw that the whole Ummah of Islam would be wiped out if he didn't do that. Or, again, we see that the Imams carried out different responsibilities at different times. But does that mean that they were working towards different goals? No, that's not the case. If you look at this map over here in the bottom right side of the slide, that's a Google Maps image of how I would go from my house in Qom to the center of Al Mustafa International University. If I were to be taking a car, one of the roads is that road that has been highlighted in blue. You see how, for example, in the bottom right side of that road, there's a U-turn that has to be made. So for a while, the car would be going in a totally opposite direction from my goal. I would be going southeast if this was a straight map of northwest, southeast. I would be going southeast when in reality I need to go northwest. But why? Because this is the road that eventually will take me to my destination. In the same way, exactly, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they all had that goal of taking their whole society back towards servitude to Allah. But they realized at certain times that the grounds were not set for this responsibility. So depending on what the obstacles were at their time, they strove tirelessly to get rid of those obstacles, to train people, to wake people up, to get the world vision of the people correct, so that one day the rule could be taken back for those people who really deserve it, which was the Ahlul Bayt. So part of the distorted image that has resulted of the Imams is because of that. Because overtly, if you don't go deep and analyze their actions, yeah, it does seem like they're carrying out different actions. Please recite a salawat. Another reason why we have a distorted image, unfortunately, of the Imams is that the Shia community throughout history has been extremely oppressed. If we read the oppression that was meted out by the likes of Hajjaj or Mutawakkil or Mansur, it's beyond belief. Like, you can't imagine that a human being, anybody, could do so much zulm. And so naturally, a lot of the political struggles of the Shia were kept secret. They were hidden. They were not something that can easily and openly be seen in the books of history, especially if history is being written by those in power, which is not always the case, but often is the case. Another unfortunate reality that we have to also know about, and people who study history have to be aware of this, is that there are fabrications as well in history. Not everything is true. Some of our great scholars, may Allah bless them, like Allama Majlisi, as I'm sure you've heard, he has a huge collection of hadith called Biharul Anwar. Allama Majlisi, may Allah bless him, his goal was not to say that everything I put in Bihar is an authentic hadith. No, his goal was to preserve the heritage of the Shia, was to preserve all of these ahadith that he saw were being lost. So he gathered everything he could find, even if there were things, and definitely there are things in Biharul Anwar that are not true. So we have a hadith that would present the Imam in a very inappropriate way sometimes, as being very abased and very humble before a tyrant caliph, in a way that doesn't behoove the Imam, definitely. I don't have time to go into some of this, but some of these narrations have been fabricated. If you go and look at where these narrations are coming from, who's narrated them, you see that they are the Banu al-Abbas themselves who are narrating these ahadith. The same way that I'm sure you've heard this famous accusation against Imam al-Mujtaba alayhi salam, that he was a womanizer who married many times and divorced many, many women. Again, this is an insult against Imam Mujtaba alayhi salam that's definitely false, that comes from the Banu al-Abbas. The Banu al-Abbas wanted to make Imam Hassan alayhi salam look bad. And unfortunately, these are there in a hadith that have been narrated in Biharul Anwar, but clearly with a little bit of research, people can figure out that this is not true. So fabricated narrations have also led to a distorted image of the Imams. Another unfortunate matter is this whole idea of taqiyya, that unfortunately taqiyya, which is a fundamental belief of the Shia, something that is there in the Holy Quran and there in the Ahadith, people have misunderstood taqiyya. If we had time, we would open this up and show that taqiyya doesn't mean that if you have a certain responsibility from Allah, you can shun that responsibility and just leave it altogether because of some danger to your life. No, taqiyya was never that. Taqiyya is like what Ali bin Yaqteen did, that the seventh Imam alayhi salam had planted him as an agent in the government of Harun, carrying out very, very dangerous and difficult missions for the Imam. But in order to protect his life and to work towards that overall goal that the Imam had, yeah, he would pray like a Sunni, he would do wudu like a Sunni. That is what taqiyya is. If we had time, we would open that up more. But again, basically, this misunderstanding of taqiyya has also led to a distorted image of the Imams. So, unfortunately, my conclusion is this, that a lot of people have this idea that the fourth Imam, the sixth Imam, from the sixth Imam onwards, the Imams were busy just engaging in teaching for the sake of teaching. They were doing ibadat, they had akhlaqi reminders that they would give to people, whereas they're totally, totally negligent of this overall very strong and heated political struggle that the Imams were going through. Please recite a salawat again. Okay, so Alhamdulillah, it's not yet become time for prayers here. Inshallah, I'll go through the first and the most important story that we have. Actually, let me make one last point. Uh, so before we go into the history, I want to also say one thing, that we have a hadith that indicate this idea that the Imams alayhimus salam, when their right was usurped, they were not happy with that. They were always waiting and longing for a true Islamic society that they could live in. Let me narrate just two narrations to you, and inshallah we'll move on. It is narrated that the sixth Imam would regularly read these lines of poetry. He would say, لِكُلِّ أُنَاسٍ دَوْلَةٌ يَرْقُبُونَهَا وَدَوْلَتُنَا فِي آخِرِ الدَّهْرِ تَظْهَرُ. That every group of people has a government that they are longing for, a society that they are waiting to live in, and ours will come at the end of time. referring to the 12th Imam, Ajjalallah Farajahu Sharif. In another very nice hadith, the 5th Imam alayhi salam, he tells one of his companions, ما من عيد للمسلمين أضحى ولا فطر إلا وهو يجدد لآل محمد فيه حزنا. He says that there is no Eid for the Muslims, no Eid al-Fitr, no Eid al-Adha, except that the family of Muhammad becomes more sad. It renews the sadness for the family of Muhammad. Sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. This companion gets surprised. He says, why? And the Imam says, لِأَنَّهُمْ يَرَوْنَ حَقَّهُمْ فِي يَدِ غَيْرِهِمْ, because they see that their right has been usurped from them. So, anyways, I just wanted to just drive home this point that the Imams were never happy with the status quo. When they lived in these oppressive dictatorships, they were not happy. And inshallah, as we will see, they struggled to fix these problems. Okay, so the first story that I wanted to narrate to you, dear brothers and sisters, is about the fifth Imam, Imam Baqir alayhi salam. It is narrated that he was called to Sham by the Caliph, Hisham bin Abdul Malik. Now, here lies a very important question. We see again and again the Imams were arrested. They lived a lot of time under arrest. One by one, they were being oppressed and killed. Why was this the case? What was it that Imam Baqir alayhi salam was doing that was such a threat to Hisham, the caliph in Sham, the Banu Umayyah caliph who was busy engaging in his own sensual desires and only worried about his political rule, somebody who had no care for religion? Why is he so worried about Imam Baqir? If you were to say that, oh, it's because Imam Baqir is teaching Shia fiqh, come on, really? All these other people are teaching fiqh and they have no problem, the Khulafa, Hisham has no problem with these other teachers of fiqh. But if Imam Baqir is presenting a different theory of fiqh, Hisham, who is somebody who has no care for religion, is going to be worried about that? No, that's not the case. There was something that Imam Baqir alayhi salam was doing that was a threat, was a fundamental threat to Hisham. And we will see this in this story. So the story is this, that Imam Baqir alayhi salam is taken to Sham by force. And before coming, by the way, I just want to make one point that all of these stories that I'm narrating before you today are from very, very trustworthy sources, very official, original books. This is taken from Al-Kafi, I believe. Yeah, this is taken from Al-Kafi, but some of the other stories are taken from other books such as Manaqib al Abi Talib or Irshad of Mufid. I don't want to go into these sources, but basically these are all from very original Shia sources. So Hisham calls the fifth Imam before him in Sham, and before the Imam enters the court of Hisham, Hisham tells all of his men to be sure that they don't respect the Imam. They have to disrespect the Imam. And so the Imam comes before him and he says salam, but he doesn't address Hisham as being the Khalifa. He doesn't say, Ya Amirul Mu'mineen, for example. Ya Amirul Mu'mineen. Hisham is enraged by this. What does Hisham say to the Imam alayhi salam? He says this that I've written here in Arabic. Ya Muhammad ibn Ali, لا يزال الرجل منكم قد شق عصا المسلمين ودعا إلى نفسه وزعم أنه الإمام سفها وقلة علم. He said, O Muhammad, son of Ali, there is always a man from you, that means from you, Banu Hashim. There's always a man from amongst you who is causing division amongst the Muslimin, who is calling people unto himself, who thinks incorrectly that he is the Imam. You see, he's telling Imam Baqir that you, Banu Hashim, you always have people who are causing division amongst the Muslims. What does that mean? That means that you're always causing people to not just follow the Banu Umayyah, calling people unto yourselves. You think that you are the Imam. Keep in mind that the word Imam, when it's said here at that time in Arabic in this conversation, it doesn't have all those connotations that we Shias today think of the word Imam. In fact, if we look in the Holy Quran and the Hadith, the word Imam means the word Hakim. It means the leader of a community. So we see that the Khalifa is rebuking the Imam and saying, you think that you are the leader, what's wrong with you, basically? And what does Imam say? Imam Baqir does not deny what he's saying. If it was false, Imam Baqir should have denied. He should have said that, no, no, who told you that? I'm just teaching fiqh. I'm not doing anything else. Instead, what does the Imam say? After this, what happened was the other people, because Hisham had told them to do so, they all came and they all insulted the Imam one by one. So then at the end of it, the Imam stood up and he addressed all of them together. And this is what he said: أيها الناس أين تذهبون؟ أين يراد بكم بنا هدى الله أولكم وبنا يختم آخركم. Do you know who we are? We the Ahlul Bayt are the ones who guided you. It was because of us that you came to this religion. Basically, what is the Imam saying? The Imam is saying that we are indeed, it's right, we are the ones who deserve to rule. We are the ones who are the Imam. He says, فَإِنْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ مُلْكٌ مُعَجَّلٌ فَإِنَّ لَنَا مُلْكًا مُؤَجَّلًا وَلَيْسَ بَعْدَ مُلْكِنَا مُلْكٌ. Anyways, he's basically saying that if you today have the kingdom in your hands, one day it will be ours. So he's threatening them. He's telling them, you better, wait. We're going to one day take this back for ourselves. Anyways, with your permission, dear brothers and sisters, I'll just take a break, say my Fajr prayers, and come back in 5-10 minutes. Inshallah, it's I think it's now become 9 p.m. in Toronto. At 9:10, inshallah, or it's become 9:03, 9:10, inshallah, we will reconvene. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum. Everybody can hear me fine again? Okay, great. Inshallah, we'll continue with these stories. Like I said, we're talking about stories that illustrate the interaction and the relationship that the Imams alayhimussalam had with the Khulafa. At least some of, obviously, we can only scratch the surface. This is a point that I should also make that, of course, in 4 hours, we can't even give a summary of this overall social political role of the Imams. Is a huge, huge discussion that warrants much more time and much more research. But inshallah, we can try to benefit nonetheless in this time. So, moving on to the sixth Imam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. As you have probably heard before, what happened during the life of Imam Sadiq was there was a change in the rulership in the Muslim world. For about 100 years or so, we had the Banu Umayyah who were in power, and by the end of it, they were weakening, and the Muslim Ummah was fed up with their oppression. They had really, really been harsh, especially to the Shia and to the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt. At that time, there was a group of people from the descendants of Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, from the descendants of that famous companion Abdullah bin Abbas. These were actually these people, there were three brothers. One of them died in the revolution, and then the other two became the first two caliphs of the Banu al-Abbas, Saffah and then Mansur. Mansur was the one who ruled for a long time, and the two stories we have before us now are to do with the same Mansur. It's worthy of knowing this point that these Banu al-Abbas were people who were very close in a sense to the Imams, to Imam Sadiq, to Imam Kadhim, Imam Baqir. They were people who lived in Medina. And there was a time that, like, there are narrations that show that there was a time that all of them, the Banu al-Abbas, the Banu Hashim, the descendants of Imam Hassan, they would all like be sitting together and planning that, okay, how are we going to get rid of the Banu Umayyah? What are we going to do? So these same people who knew the Imams very well, who knew the inner circle of the Imams, who knew the companions of the Imams, who knew the thinking of the Imams, these were the same people who usurped the power for themselves. They took advantage of that love that the Muslim Ummah had for the Ahlul Bayt. They took advantage of the tragedy of Karbala. That was their slogan, was that we want to take revenge for Karbala, something along that line. It's not exactly that. Um, Al-Rida min Ali Muhammad, that we are calling to the one who people are pleased with from Ali Muhammad. Anyways, they took advantage of that atmosphere and they usurped the power for themselves. And when they went into power, they changed their colors and they became extremely, extremely oppressive towards the Ahlul Bayt. La'anatullahi alayhim. And so, given that situation, Imam Sadiq had to act very differently at that time. All of a sudden, there was a new government in power whose general Muslim Ummah had hope in. They were not fed up with them the way they were fed up with the Banu Umayyah. On the other hand, because there was a new government in power, this new government was being very careful of Imam Sadiq. And like I said, this new government was people like Mansur who knew Imam Sadiq very well. They knew that Imam Sadiq was somebody who claimed the power for himself. Anyways, so that's just to give an idea that, like I was saying, that the time that the Imams lived in was not always the same. And that's why we see that their actions, depending on the situation that they lived in, differed. Nonetheless, there were times where Mansur, now the Khilafah was now in Baghdad. Mansur actually founded the city of Baghdad on the Tigris River. And then Baghdad has always been, or at least at that time, was also a very important city for many great Shia ulama. But anyways, there were times that like the same way that Imam Baqir had been arrested and taken to Sham, now Imam Sadiq is being arrested and brought before the Khalifa in Baghdad. And we can see the bravery, the honor, and the strength of the interaction of the Imam with the Khalifa. At one time, this is narrated in hadith that a fly started to trouble the Khalifa when the Imam Sadiq, had been brought before Mansur, the Khalifa. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is in the presence of the Khalifa, and the Khalifa is being annoyed by a fly. He tries to swat it away a couple of times, but it just keeps bugging him until he gets really fed up. And he asks the Imam, Ya Aba Abdullah, lima khuliqa dhubab? Why was this fly created? You can imagine that maybe he was even trying to, suck up to the Imam and say that, oh, look, Imam, I'm still asking you your opinion. I have respect for you. But Imam shows him that, no, I don't agree. Like, I don't submit to your authority. And he's going to maintain this principled stance against him. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam strongly says, لِيُذِلَّ بِهِ الْجَبَابِرَةِ, that Allah created the fly so that it can disgrace you tyrant kings. That is one interaction that happened between the sixth Imam alayhi salam, Mansur. Another very interesting story in our books of hadith is that the following. Let me read it to you. That the wali of the Haramain, so the basically the governor of the Khalifa, was told to go and burn down the house of Ja'far bin Muhammad. So he did. He went and he started to put fire to the house of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and the fire started to spread. The door was burning, the dihliz, that means like the corridor, the alleyway was burning in the house. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam comes out bravely, announcing who he is, fearlessly going over the fire. يمشي فيها ويقول أنا ابن أعراق الثرى أنا ابن إبراهيم خليل الله, that I am the son, I am the lineage of that old family, that deeply rooted lineage. I am the son of Ibrahim, the prophet of Allah, the friend of Allah, alayhi salam. So again, I just want you brothers and sisters to think about the situation. This is at the time of Mansur. Definitely a lot of time in the life of Imam Sadiq has passed already. Imam Sadiq, like I was saying, was so well known across the Muslim Ummah. So many people had been trained by him. So many people loved him. Does it make sense that the Khalifa oppresses the Imam and thereby gets people upset with himself? If the Imam alayhi salam is not engaging in any political resistance, if the Imam is not doing anything dangerous to the Khalifa, why would the Khalifa carry out these kind of activities? Why would he say that the house of Ja'far ibn Sa'd and Muhammad needs to be burnt down? Clearly, there was something there that was causing tension between them. Anyways, that's another story for us to look at. Okay, a very interesting story again. Even after his death, the Imam alayhi afdal al-tahiyyati was-salam, Imam Sadiq, lays another blow against Mansur. Like I said, definitely there was a lot happening that, Imam Sadiq was resisting the oppression of Mansur. One of the things that the Imam did was that after he passed away, he wrote a will that was itself a attack against the Khulafa, against Mansur and the Banu al-Abbas. It was a way of outwitting them, definitely. So what happened is this. Let me just read this narration to you. That the person narrating it says that the Khalifa Mansur called me in the middle of the night, and he was sitting on his chair, and there was a candle before him, and there was like a book that he was reading, a letter basically that he was reading. So I came to Mansur the Khalifa and I said salam to him. He threw this letter at me and he started to cry. He started to cry. He said, "This is the letter saying that Ja'far ibn Muhammad has died. فَإِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ." He says this 3 times. Let me just make a point here. This is the Khalifa Mansur with one of his henchmen. Why is he crying for the death of Imam Sadiq? Is it is it not hard to believe that it's very, very possible that these people actually did love the Imams? Like I said, they were people who were close to the Imams. Back in the day, they had a lot of time that they were around the Imams. They knew the Imams very well. But because of their lust for power, they were ready to kill the Imams. They were ready to oppress the Imams. But that doesn't mean that, like, why would Mansur here be faking his crying, is what I'm saying. He's just amongst his own inner circle. It's not hard to believe that he's actually really crying. He actually loved the Imam, but he still was an enemy of the Imam. So he says, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un 3 times. And he says, Ayna mithlu Ja'far. Who is there like Ja'far? So he has this love for Ja'far apparently. But still, what does he tell this person? He tells this person working for him that write a letter that if Ja'far ibn Muhammad has left an heir, if he has appointed an imam after him, that person should be killed right away. Because, like I said, Mansur was somebody who knew the Imams. He knew that the Imams were claiming this hukumat for him, for themselves, this leadership. And so it was the perfect opportunity that there's no Imam who's famous and grown up and built up his reputation. No, it's probably some young Imam who's now just going to inherit from his father. Quickly, we can kill him off before anything happens. So he writes this letter, and when the response comes to him, Mansur is told that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam left 5 people as his heir. One of them is Mansur himself. So in a way of outwitting the Khalifa, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, before he passed away, he wrote a will that put 5 people as his heirs. One of them was the Khalifa himself, and one of them was that governor of Medina. It was just another way that the Imam was standing up against the injustice of the leader and outwitting him. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay, now we come to 3 stories, inshallah, to do with Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, and then we'll leave it at that. This is an interesting story that is narrated in this book, Maqatil, it's actually Maqatil al-Talibiyin. No, sorry, Manaqib ala Abi Talib. Anyways, one of our old books of hadith, that this 7th Imam, there was a time that he was on the run. He was running from village to village. He was running away, and it came to the point that he went to go hide in a cave. And then in the cave, he meets a Christian who he has this interesting conversation with, and the Christian becomes a Muslim. But I just want you guys to imagine the scenario. دخل موسى بن جعفر بعد قرى الشام متنكرا هاربا فوقع في غار عليه السلام. He basically is on the run. This is, like I said, the Imam. The Imams, like when we see it, inshallah, next week we'll talk about what happened when the 7th Imam died. We see that there was a huge community of Shias that the Imam was in charge of. So many people loved him. But still, the government is putting such pressure on him that he has to leave his home in Medina and he has to flee. He's on the run, running from one city to another city, one village to another village, hiding from the government. So we can imagine what kind of tension there was between the Imam and the government. Another 2 beautiful stories. I'm guessing perhaps you have heard this first one. These are now 2 interactions between Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi afdal al-tahiyyati was-salam and Harun al-Rashid la'natullahi alayh. Harun was one of the grandsons of Mansur, who we mentioned before. I'm sure you've heard of Harun. Harun ruled in what is known as, I don't know, the golden period of Islamic history. The Muslim Ummah was at its peak in terms of strength and power and stability, and even in terms of sciences. But still, Harun was an enemy of the Ahlul Bayt who hated the Ahlul Bayt and oppressed the Shia immensely. So in this story, basically what happens is that Harun comes to the city of Medina, and Harun wants to show off to everybody that, look, I am from the progeny of Abbas. I am from the family of the Holy Prophet. That's why, because of my lineage, because of my relationship with the Prophet, I deserve to be the Khalifa. So in a show, wanting to show himself off, he goes before the grave of the Holy Prophet with many people, and he comes before the Prophet and he loudly says, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, Assalamu alayka ya ibn Am, muftakhiran bidhalika ala ghayrihi. So he's trying to show off to everybody that, look, the Prophet is my uncle. And in front of everybody, he says, peace be upon you, O uncle. Right away, Imam Kadhim is there. He doesn't let Harun succeed in giving this image of himself as being the closest to the Prophet. Right away, fearlessly, this is the Khalifa of the time who has killed his father, who has put so much oppression on the Shias. Without any fear, Imam Kadhim alayhi salam comes and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, Assalamu alayka ya Abata. And then it says, فَتَغَيَّرَ وَجْهُ الرَّشِيدِ, that he became angry, so angry. Harun became so furious that it was visible from his face that he had been outwitted by the Imam. Another story, inshallah, we'll leave it at that. Again, where Imam Kadhim alayhi salam outwits the Khalifa of his time and shows him the true reason why there is a struggle between the Imam and Harun. This is a very, very telling story. Again, I'll give you the source. I think it's again Manaqib ala Abi Talib that I'm getting these from. 1 second. Yeah, again, it's from Manaqib ala Abi Talib. Just a point, Manaqib ala Abi Talib is a book of hadith that is, like I said, very much recognized by both Shias and Sunnis. It's written by somebody called Ibn Shahrashub from the 6th century Hijrah. So in this story, one day Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam is before Harun, and Harun wants to show himself as, giving a favor to the Ahlul Bayt, doing something good to them. He wants to show off, he wants to make them, as we would say in Farsi, minnat guzari. Even it comes in the Holy Quran, لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى, that don't make your sadaqat go astray. Don't lose your sadaqah by doing minnat, by making the person who you give the money to feel that they owe you a favor. And so Harun wants to do that. He wants to give something to the Ahlul Bayt and make it seem like, oh wow, look, I'm such a nice person, I'm such a generous person, you guys owe me something now. So Harun says to the Imam alayhi salam, خُذْ فَدَكًا حَتَّى أَرُدَّهَا إِلَيْكَ. That take fadak back. You Ahlul Bayt, you're always complaining that fadak was taken from your mother Zahra alayhi salam. Fine, take it back. Initially the Imam refuses, but Harun insists. And so then Imam tells him, listen, I won't take it back except by its true borders. لا أخذها إلا بحدودها, except by its borders that I will now tell you. And so Harun asks, وَمَا حُدُودُهَا? What are its borders? And the Imam tells him, listen, إِنْ حَدَدْتُهَا لَمْ تَرُدُّهَا, that if I tell you its borders, you won't give it back to me. But Harun is adamant. He said, no, I'm going to give it back to you. بِحَقِّ جَدِّكَ إِلَّا فَعَلْتَ. He says, I swear by your grandfather, I will give fadak back to you. So now the Imam starts. Listen to the story. The Imam starts one by one to give the borders. He starts with the southern border, then he goes to the eastern border, the western border, and the northern border. He says, أَمَّا الْحَدُّ الْأَوَّلْ فَعَدًا. As for its southern border, that is Aden in Yemen. And it says, فَتَغَيَّرَ وَجْهُ الرَّشِيدِ, that the face of Harun changed. وَقَالَ إِلَيْهَا, وَقَالَ إِيهَا, he made some comment basically. Then the Imam goes on, as for its second border, الحد الثاني Samarkand. Samarkand was a very important city in the country of today, Uzbekistan, all the way far in the east of the country, the east of the Muslim world. So then it says that فَرْبَدَّ وَجْهَهُ, again Harun's face is changing, he's getting furious, he's getting angry. And then the Imam goes on, the third border, the western border, أَحَدُّ الثَّالِث إِفْرِقِيَّة, all the way in Africa, that's the western border. فَاسْوَدَّ وَجْهُهُ, now Harun's face has become black. And then Imam goes on to give the last border, وَالرَّابِعَ سَيْفُ الْبَحْرِ, basically somewhere like Armenia in today's geography. She says, سَيْفُ الْبَحْرِ مِمَّا يَلِي الْجُزُرِ وَأَرْمِينِيَا. So Harun now he says, لَمْ يَبْقَى فَلَمْ يَبْقَى لَنَا شَيْءٌ. And so then he says that then you haven't left anything for us. And Harun gets so upset that it says in this narration, فَعِنْدَ ذَلِكَ عَزَمَ عَلَى قَتْلِهِ, that it was at this point that Harun made up his mind to kill the Imam. What is the Imam doing by saying this to Harun? He's showing Harun, in addition to obviously outsmarting him and making him look bad, he's showing Harun that, listen, it was never a fight over one small garden called Fadak. That was not why Zahra al-Mardiya came before the first Khalifa alayhi salam and gave that lecture. That's not why Banu Hashim have always had an issue with these khulafa, with you khulafa. No, the matter is much greater than that. The matter is to do with the leadership of the Muslim Ummah. And so these are, inshallah, these are some examples that I brought before you to show how the Imams always had a very principled stance. They didn't submit. They didn't submit, at least normally we can say they didn't submit before these tyrant caliphs. It was very clear when the news of these kind of interaction would reach other Muslims, imagine what kind of energy it would instill them with. They would say that, oh wow, the Imam, the son of the Prophet, this noble individual who we study our fiqh from, who we learn the Quran from, look at how he is bravely interacting with the Khalifa. Look at how he does not submit to the tyrant ruler and submit to the theory of the rulership. And so, this is a lesson for us, that this is undoubtedly the case, that the Imams always had this stance, and we should keep that in mind, that even the latter Imams Okay, we don't see other than Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we don't see any of the Imams taking up the sword and going to the battlefield and fighting, but they had a plan. They were confronting as possible. They were trying to slowly wake up the Muslim Ummah, show people that the status quo was not correct, and try to fix it. Actually, the class finished faster than I expected. I expected I would go for another 10 minutes, but alhamdulillah, it has now been 1 hour since we started. So with that, I will end. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. Thank you very much for attending. Inshallah, may Allah accept it from you. I'm at your service. If you have any questions, I can try to answer them now, or if I don't know, I can try to get back to you later on. Feel free to be in touch also subsequently. Like I said, next week, inshallah, if we have the tawfiq, we will talk more about the relationship with between the Imam and his Shia. How did the Shia community grow over the time of the Imams? What were some of the interactions between them? So I'm looking at the attendee chat. If I don't see any questions, then inshallah I'll close this and take your leave. Thank you again. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My pleasure, my pleasure. May Allah accept it. Okay, I didn't see any questions, so I'll take your leave. Khuda Hafiz.